again, everything's relevant to the point in time that you reference it from. And for not only that point, but ECW for its entire duration was never a real threat to the WWF or WCW. Both of those companies could pay exponentially more than ECW could ever dreamt of paying. So, my take on it as being one of the boys is you can never fault somebody for going for what they perceive as being a bigger payday, although I have a different take on the quote unquote bigger paydays. My fervent belief is that we all have the right to choose. Troy Martin has the sole right to choose what the franchise character will do. Michael Foley has the sole right for Mick Foley, Mankind, whatever incarnations he had, Dude Love, all the rest of it, as did Brian Pillman for his character. And what I think today is my overriding takeaway today is that it surprises me that many people would still want to go to the Fed when, you hear ad nauseum the stories coming out about the pays being the shits, the dwindling numbers. We've talked previously, so not being a dead horse, about how they were able to sell the B show for $1.2 billion. But here's a little, primer for all the kids in the dressing room. If you think part of that money is going to somehow work its way down to your paycheck, I've got a really good Aerosmith song called "Dream On" that probably is apropos in this case. But no, as far as Mick Foley or Brian Pillman deciding to leave and go to what they perceived at that time as being greener pastures, how can you fault somebody for pursuing a dream and thinking that they're doing the right thing for their family at the time?
Yeah, you really can. It just was kind of surprising, to me anyway, that Pillman was essentially, if you think about it, getting paid in the same month from WCW, ECW, and the WWF. I don't know if there has ever been a guy that could ever say the three biggies. He was getting paid from all of them and possibly working all of them to get that paycheck. So maybe he was crazy, but maybe really he was just crazy like a fox.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I think Brian Pillman was taking Terry Funk's words and putting them to masterful use, that he was able to do that. And, for me, Brian Pillman always stands out as being, every time I hear an ECW chant or I think of ECW, and, we almost, just by reaction, think of Sandman and Raven and Taz and the Triple Threat and Francine, and you go through the whole liturgy of the talent that was there. But in my head, Brian Pillman at the time that he was in there, and same with Sherry Martel, is that they both play very large into the legend that is ECW. And in Brian's case, in large part because of the type of character that he played, the loose cannon character that he debuted in ECW and fleshed out in ECW, that it stands out. Even though Brian was a WCW talent coming to ECW and blurring those lines in between, he remains in the pantheon of ECW legends, like a Bam Bam Bigelow, a Chris Candido, a Public Enemy, down the list of all the incredible guys that had gone through there. I think that Brian Pillman's portrayal of the loose cannon in ECW really set the stage for where wrestling would go for the next 25 years.
And Brian unfortunately died at the age of 35 on October 5th, 1997. He died in his hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota. It was actually the result of a heart attack. He had a heart disease, very rare form. It was actually the same death as his father had.
Yeah, I remember getting a phone call about Brian, and, at that point, again, everything's relevant at the point in time it sits. at that time, you know, we hadn't had this constant onslaught. It had just that was sort of the front end, and you know, Brian was one of those guys that was in such phenomenal shape and was so pristine with his diet. You know, I talked about white flour, white death earlier. That really was Brian Pillman. You know, forget the character, the loose cannon, and the rest of it. That was Brian Pillman, the human being. And, you know, ate an extraordinarily clean diet. So when we heard in the business that he had died of a heart attack, it just was one of those things where like suddenly there was a huge question mark in your head. Like, how did that guy die of a heart attack? It wasn't like he ate fatty meats every night, a big, thick, greasy steak, you know, and just lived life how it was. Brian Pillman was extraordinarily disciplined on his diet. And, you know, yet we see the end result. You know, in many ways, it sort of mirrors the frustration I have that, you know, and Chris Candido's passing, you know, that here's a guy who for years I expected to get a call on, gets cleaned up, gets in phenomenal shape, and then comes to TNA and ends up dying from a broken ankle. It's just, you know, the same thing with Brian Pillman. One of those things where you have to scratch your head and think, like, you know, if there's a God upstairs, he's got one hell of a sixth sense of humor. But, you know, it just was one of those things that when Brian's passing that you just scratched your head and found it very hard to believe.